Welcome to today's virtual Hinckley Forum. My name is Nahom Tabdessa, and I will be the forum host for today's conversation. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a non-partisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forum seeks to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is presented in partnership with Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce. We'd like to thank our media sponsor, KCTW, for recording and rebroadcasting our forums as part of the Hinckley Radio Hour. Today's forum is supply chain and the impact on housing. We're joined by panelists Ross Ford of the Utah Home Builders Association, Jeremy Hafen, president of Clyde Companies, Michael Parker, vice president of public affairs of Ivory Homes, and Greg White of Interstate Brick. If you have any questions, please enter them in the YouTube chat. And with that, I'll turn our time over to Ginger Chin, who will be moderating today's conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for having us. And my name is Ginger Chin. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy at the Salt Lake Chamber. And at the Chamber, we really dig into the current issues and what's facing our business communities. And what we're hearing loud and clear is that housing is a huge issue for us statewide. It doesn't matter if we're in our rural economies or our urban economies. We are in a housing gap, what we're calling a crisis, and it seems to be getting worse. And it's exacerbated by the pandemic. A lot of people are moving into the state, super interested in working remote from their homes, want larger homes. But far and above, we're hearing about supply chain issues, and that's what we're here to talk about today is how is the supply chain and some of the issues related to the pandemic and getting supplies and being able to utilize supplies hurting us in the housing market and the building of houses. So we've assembled this panel to talk a little bit about that very issue. And so I'm going to go ahead and have each one of these of our panelists introduce themselves, talk about their business and their role. So I'll go ahead and start here with you, Ross.
Thank you. Super fun to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for all of you, especially online. We've got a couple in the room, but appreciate you online joining with us. So my name is Ross Ford. I'm the executive officer for the Home Builders Association of Utah. So I represent a lot of builders, a lot of suppliers, a lot of different people that actually contribute to or suffer from this supply chain problem. I come from a little bit of an interesting background. I was a builder for years, lots of years. I still build now on the side, but I've also had the opportunity to work at UVU for years. I worked there full time and I still teach there. And I also got to work for Doppel for a while. So I got to work on the policy side of things. So I kind of come with a very broad perspective. And with that, do we just pass it on and then we'll go with questions from there?
Yeah, okay. For sure. Right, let's go ahead and take next.
Okay, I'm Greg White with Interstate Brick. My background is actually accounting and finance. Interstate Brick is a local manufacturer. We currently have about 20 million brick in inventory on the ground, and we ship all over the United States and Canada. And most recently, we shipped about 500,000 brick to the Louvre in Paris. They were papers, but still brick. We don't seem to have the supply issues as much as we do labor issues. We'll talk about that later.
Michael Parker.
Good afternoon. Michael Parker, Vice President of Public Affairs at Ivory Homes. Less about me, other than I'm a very proud Hinckley alumni. So excited to be here today, and good to see many online. But Ivory Homes has actually led the Utah market for 34 consecutive years as the state's largest home builder. A number of years ago, we had the opportunity to look at growing outside our state, and we decided to focus exclusively on Utah, which has led us to build in every segment of the market, from apartments to luxury custom homes and everything in between. But we've brought a really core focus to our company over time in terms of this affordability challenge and making sure we're pushing in every direction that's within our toolbox and sometimes in other people's toolboxes to address this issue and make sure that Utahns can afford to call Utah home.
I'm Jeremy Hafen. I'm the president of Clyde Companies. Clyde Companies is the parent company of several businesses, of which we supply lumber, ready-mix concrete, sand and gravel. We do a lot of construction work across the Mountain West and Great Plains regions. And so I'm here to help represent a little bit of discussion around the supply chain and what's going on with lumber and cement and shortages and some of those types of things. So I'm glad to be here.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, I'll go ahead and just start with you since you have the mic and we'll just kick it off. Now, you mentioned you're here to represent the supply chain gap. What's the number one gap that you're seeing, and what do you attribute that to? You know, we've all seen as we were this summer, you know, everybody's doing home improvement projects. And Home Depot, there was a joke that lumber was gold. So tell us a little bit about that from your perspective.
Oh, yeah, the memes that were flying around were pretty.
They're pretty accurate.
impressive, yes.
Yeah.
It's hard to identify what's the biggest constraint on the supply chain, but I think lumber has been one of the most prominent gaps there. You know, the price of lumber went up 200 to 300, 400%, depending on the products over the last, I'd say, 6 to 12 months. The interesting thing is, though, those prices have come down now to 5-year averages. But we've hit a bottom and we're going back up again. But you don't see that in the inventory pricing of the dealers until 60 to 90 days after, because the inventory burns and insurance that you have to go through. So I think lumber's been the most interesting, and I think that's really driven the housing prices quite a bit over the last little while.
The reasons why, I'm just curious as to what you're hearing as well, that mills were shut down and there was the inability to get labor to get the lumber to the end of the road. Tell us, you know, what you're hearing.
Yeah, here's the irony. The logs from the forest are at all-time 10-year lows, which is really interesting. You go to the mill side of the supply chain, and they're at these extreme highs. That is what happened back in March of 2020, when the pandemic hit, is we had quite a bit of, you know, nobody knew what was going on. So a lot of the mills actually shut down for a period of time. They had to send their workers home. They had no choice. And those 2 or 3, 4, 5 months really disrupted the supply chain. So once, you know, 4 or 5 months later, after the start of COVID, we realized, well, actually, this thing's going the other direction. Then is what happened is, you know, to get a mothball mill back online takes months or even years to get the labor back in place. A lot of those people went and found other jobs. And so now that that's back in place, just that backlog of demand, of being able to take care of that demand was incredible.
So Ross, talk to us a little bit about your members, you know, talk to us about the Home Builders Association and you know, who do you represent and how this supply chain issue is impacting your members and what you're hearing from them.
Okay, thanks. So we represent mostly within the Home Builders Association. It's smaller builders, smaller as far as numbers of people within the companies, lots of little companies. A lot of the bigger production builders are certainly our members, but that's not the majority of our members, although they build the majority of the homes, if that makes sense. So when you're talking about a smaller builder, say it's a 1 or 2 man shop that they build maybe 5 or 6 homes a year, when lumber prices change, since that's what Jeremy brought up, cement's also been a problem this year, and we've seen sheetrock, I name it, across the board. But when they change, because they don't have a big internal network to deal with it, oftentimes it impacts them harder than it may one of the production builders, just because they don't have the infrastructure, the office staff, the personnel to be watching it and prepare for it. So then it hits them when they're partway through a project and they don't have a really good ability to bid for it and make it work. So it has hit them hard. It's been interesting to watch how they've responded to it. And I think that's a good question. A lot of the builders, and this speaks to the production builders as well, I have seen that they have suffered huge losses, and they've done that willingly. They have said, we made a deal with our customer, and we're going to stand by that deal. Now, at some point, prices had to raise, and they would do it, but I've seen a number of builders take pretty good losses and say, we're going to work through this and do it. And then they work with the different suppliers and say, okay, what are we going to do? How is this going to work? And is there a way we can get our bids correct? Because again, it's been so volatile. From the time you look at a project to the time you actually bid that project, we saw many of the supplies literally double in price. Well, how do you prepare the homeowner, or how do you prepare your books when you have that kind of an increase?
Has this been a slow ramp, or is this been just an escalation from, what's different from 2019 to 2021?
And I think that's a good point, the slow ramp. A lot of times we see certain products that we just know every January, give or take, we're going to see increases. The drywall companies are going to send out a letter and they're going to say, look, we're going to give a certain increase this year. This is what it's going to be, planned for. We don't always know what that increase will be, but we know to expect it. We will see the same thing with ready mix. There are certain cycles within the process where we see it with lumber as well. But at least in my lifetime doing this, I've never seen it increase as fast and without warning as it did on this.
So Greg, I'm going to turn to you from your perspective. Slow build in terms of demand, or is this just as escalating?
Well, as Roger talked about, some of the smaller builders, most of those 4 and 5 home a year builders are your custom builders, and they're building the high end or the high end stuff. And so pricing at the time, you bid a house in February and you expect it to be done in September, you're not going to be done until maybe the following February because of the supply chains slow down and then the pricing going up. Oftentimes they're renegotiating with the customer saying, listen, this is the pricing that we have. A lot of them have clauses in their contracts that say if it goes over too high, they can price on to the home buyer. And then home buyers have to back away sometimes, so that creates it. But the availability of housing in Utah and this affordable housing and the supply chain issues aren't just Utah. I sit on a national board and they're all over the country that are these issues. Utah just happens to be one of those fast growing areas. So it shows up really, really well in Utah. But from an interstate brick perspective, like I said earlier, we have 20 million brick on the ground. We don't have a problem getting brick out. We have a problem if it's because we do custom sizes, custom shapes. Those things take us longer, and our lack of labor has pushed us out to 8 to 12 weeks on production stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about the labor, if we could. Before we get to that, Michael, will you talk a little bit about the housing crisis as a whole? Can you just give us some high level, not even really, I mean, I know that we're talking about supply chain today, but can you just kind of paint the picture for our audience and our listeners, if you will?
Sure, I'll try. I think most importantly, right, there's a couple core fundamentals happening around housing. One, this pandemic accelerated a lot of demand. Part of that was interest rates, but we all were at home for a much longer period. That left some of us to go to renovation and left some of us to say, I need a better situation. That seemed to accelerate things in a big way. Coming into that dynamic, we already had an existing shortage and had the 4th fastest appreciation over the last 25 years, more than any other. So Utah's fundamental dynamics were leading to not just an affordability problem, but a crisis at this moment. To connect that to the supply chain on lumber, our lumber package a year ago versus, I'll say August because it is changing, was about $44,000 more per home than it was a year ago. To put that in context for a student or a first-time home buyer, between 5 and 10% down, you're carrying that cost of what you need to additionally save. That's one component, right? We've seen similar increases on concrete, you've seen similar increases around brick, you've seen it around tile, you've seen it around a lot of our hardy stuff. No one really anticipated the disruption of, say, the Texas winter storm, which just blew up our country's resin production. Resin's an industrial glue, it goes in everything. And so when you shut down that production for a month, it had broad systemic both supply chain and cost increases. And we're dealing now with a ripple effect of that with Hurricane Ida on PVC pipe for development. So it seems like whack-a-mole every single day with this affordability overlay at the same time.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just curious, and I'll kind of go down the road, I'll start with you, Jeremy. When we're talking about supply chain, do you see that the port congestion issues are an issue? Is that something that you're seeing? And how do you see that, collectively a remedy, with, kind of from your perspective? And just to tee this up a little bit, we're hearing containers sitting at the coast for weeks, and you can't get your container because you can't get a chassis on a truck to get your container back to where you need it to go. Just curious from your perspective, how that's impacting you.
Yeah, and that goes to the chip shortage, which are produced overseas as well. So I think a lot of the port issues is labor and trying to find truck drivers and loaders, builders, and everything else that the port has to use there. So yeah, it's just across the board. I think this huge COVID ramp of people shifting how they were spending their money to a completely different way, completely disrupted the supply chain across the world. And I think that's what happened. And now the supply chain is trying to catch up with what's going on. How does it solve itself? I think it's going to take a long time, years, months and years to really settle in if the demand continues. If the demand settles down, I think it'll fix itself a little bit quicker. But I'm not sure that that's anything that we want to wish for, is a slowness demand and a downturn to hit us all. But a little bit of a moderate correction actually could be healthy.
Michael, I'd like to hear your perspective on the supply chain and ports.
Yeah, I think the biggest impacts for us is this timeliness issue. Delays cost money. And so as we have material delays or just labor shortages, those things add up by the end. So for example, our higher end homes, we're pushing 90 days to 180 days over their normal timelines. So we're almost double our build times on some of those. As you get more into the streamline, we're still looking at 60 to 90 days, depending on what the impact is. I think the manufacturers, the suppliers have actually caught back up to the demand, but now it's the constraints on transportation. So a container cost $2,000 last year to move something. It's $22,000 this year. Our trucking rates are way out the window, and if the truckers can find the drivers or the trailers. And so I think that transportation side of the supply chain has really become the focus part, aside from like the Texas storm or the Ida, where you just shut down a complete side of the supply chain for manufacturing.
Great, love to hear from you. You say that you have quite a bit of brick in your warehouses, but have you been impacted by the coastal issues and the congestion?
We bring one product in from India, but we've been getting our containers in on a regular basis, so we haven't experienced that. The driver and the loads, when we bring loads in or when we're shipping loads out, and with us it's mostly shipping loads out. Drivers have their choice of 10 different loads to take, so they decide which ones they want, which one's most profitable for them. And so yeah, there's a shortage of drivers, and the fuel prices are jacking everything up. I have literally a house here in Salt Lake that I was bringing some stone in for. That's $18,000 for the stone. And my first bid in February on the freight on it was $4,400 per load. There's 3 loads. And my latest bid was $8,700 per load. So you're looking at a $27,000 freight charge on an $18,000 product. So we're finding other ways to try to get rail doesn't seem to be able to keep is helping us out. We're constantly looking at things to bring those outside things in. Fortunately, we're more of an out shipper than we are an in shipper.
That's from your perspective.
So maybe the best way to give my perspective to start with, are the port issues a problem? We don't know a lot of times because we go to our good friend like Jeremy. They come up with a new excuse every day. Right? And they are brilliant at it. I say excuse because it's fun to take a shot at him because he's out of reach. He can't smack me, but it is something different every day. It's not really an excuse. It's really a for real problem that today it's shipping, or not long ago it was the resin. 2 quick stories though that maybe will put it into context. I was talking with a lumber salesman. He happened to be at a big lumber distribution center not long ago. And one of the other people, because he was there complaining the same thing, because he was having all the builders come to him and say, "We're tired of the excuses, go find out what the problem was." As he was sitting there, one of the guys says, "Come here, I want you to see this email right now." An email came across the guy's computer, and it just barely came in. It says, look, I will come in and pick up a load. It's due to go here, but you need to give me an additional $1,000. All the shipping prices stay the same. You give me personally as the truck driver an additional $1,000. And the dispatcher that's sitting there is going, it's that truck right there. You can see him outside the fence. And the driver was just going, look, I have another load down the road, 10 minutes away, that will give me the money. I'm gonna go pick that load up if you won't do it. So the other one, again, lumber, is a different salesman, but he was again in one of these distribution centers. And we've struggled with the engineered lumber. So the engineered lumber, for those of you that don't know, it's anytime we take smaller pieces and we glue them together in bigger pieces. We call that engineered lumber. That we got behind because of like what Michael talked about, because of the resin. So when things froze in Texas, it froze those plants and they had to be repiped, and it cost us a lot of time and it hurt us. But they've started to catch up. So again, this guy says, look, I've got people sending me pictures of all this lumber sitting here. Why won't you ship it to me? Again, they're sitting there and he goes, I'll take that lumber right over there. And it was across the street, not far away, but you could see it. Well, it was sitting on rail cars. And they said, here's the problem. For us to unload that lumber and get it to you, we have to have a train, an engine, come pick that up, move it across the street down our spur and put it where we can unload it. And they couldn't get employees to do that. So it was literally within sight, but they couldn't move it because they didn't have the manpower with the skill to be able to get on one of those switcher trains and move those cars into the yard. So maybe that answers some of the port questions. And again, it's like Mike said, it's whack-a-mole. It's something new every single day, and it's always hard.
One of the things that we're working on at the chamber is a shipping coalition. So working with the World Trade Center and the inland port folks, as well as the chamber, to understand some of the issues, working with the Federal Maritime Commission and our delegation to see if we can come up with some proactive solutions. Because it's complex. We're hearing labor over and over again, but it's, you know, the lack of material or cargo containers, the lack of the ability to get cars and chassis. So it's a complex issue. It's not just the ship, as you were saying, Jeremy. So I want to hit on inflation. It sounds like everywhere you turn, everything's costing double, triple, or 200% more in some cases. I mean, this is insane. Do we think that this is a temporary inflation, or is this going to be long-term? What are your thoughts on it as you're watching this, and what's your crystal ball? And so, Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. You probably have a better.
But first, Jeremy, no, this is on the record.
Do I get a rebuttal on this?
No, but whatever you say on this inflation, we're holding you. So
we're going to live to it.
Yeah, we're looking for some reprieve.
If I could guess what inflation was going to do, I could be a rich man.
That's right.
So I personally believe that it's transitory right now. It feels that way, but we're also starting to see a little bit of labor crunch, meaning people are coming in and saying they're ready to leave for higher salaries. They got across the street or whatever. So if we saw some consistent labor problems with, you know, the price of labor, I think it would be less transitory, more permanent. But, you know, with the supply chain, I think it's just these ripples that are going through the economy. And I think they are transitory. Where does it go from here? I don't know. But I'm hoping they're transitory to some extent, and I hope we're not in a inflationary bubble. But you know, if you look at some of the historical theories on inflation, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we think we are, then everybody's going to go buy now because it's going to be more expensive later, and then it perpetuates. And I'm not sure we're there yet. Can we get there? It could, but I do think we're transitioning or transitory, I should say.
I think I agree with Jeremy. I would just add that I think the transportation costs are systemic, meaning they're going to impact every part of the economy. So if transportation is becoming such a pinch point, particularly labor around trucking, that's going to flow through the entire economy. So I would say that's going to become a much larger share of inflation. Last few months, it's been the miracle of used cars being more expensive than new cars. That's actually been a predominant driver of the CPI index. But I think you're going to start to see that one play through. And then wage inflation in Utah, I think, is a reality in terms of median sales price is now out of reach for 50% of the people that live here. There's gonna have to be a cost of living adjustment that comes with that. It's just a reality for our business community to get our arms around that and understand it. It's why affordability is not just a person-to-person issue, it's an economic issue, and that's gonna bear out in the next 5 years in a real way.
So you touched on something that I think would be great for the listeners and folks in the room here. What's the average housing cost right now? And what's the average house price? And how has that changed over time? I know it's been changing. I know you keep a pretty good eye on this, but we'd love to just for the sake of conversation.
Well, statewide, the median sales price is right around $350,000. In Salt Lake County, it's closer to $550,000. During the recession, actually, the highest growth of appreciation was in Washington County, which led all of the metro counties and got up to 458 at the time as the median sales price. So we've seen upwards of 20 to 25% appreciation in a single year. That's about 5 to 7 years worth of appreciation followed into 1 year. A lot of that is just the surge of demand, but at the same time, there's collateral damage to that, which is you went from 60 to 70% of Utahns being able to afford that median sales price. In 1 year, we've cut 20% of Utahns out of the housing market.
And that's really scary. So we have at the Salt Lake Chamber, and it's actually something Michael spearheaded. We have a housing gap coalition where we come together and talk about the issues related to the housing gap, and the gap's growing. And it's because of all of these issues that we're talking about today. So Greg, let's talk a little bit about that inflation from your perspective. We kind of got off topic a little.
No, the inflation issue is key. A year ago in August, our inflation rate was 1.4%. And this last August, it was 5.4%. So that's a 40% increase in inflation a year. What we see, we try to keep our price increases to 3% if possible, never more than 5%. This year we were at 3%. But fuel prices are a big perpetrator for that. I mean, the fuel prices have gone up since January, 49% increase in fuel price. So that's changing all of the inflationary things.
Let's hear about your perspective on inflation.
That's a hard one for me to answer. I tend to deal with problems as they come in more on a micro level rather than the macro level. So I don't necessarily see the overall inflation other than just the same as all of you, the news and different reports like that. What I do see though is, and I hear all the time, again, back to this labor issue and how it will impact inflation, is we are starting to see, well, I shouldn't say start, this has been going on for a year or more now, of our workers migrating from place to place and moving for additional money. We have, I was talking to a builder just the other day that he said, well, I'm glad we have some in-house people because we showed up on this one particular house. It's mostly framed and completely deserted. Well, what happened to your framers? That guy just two houses over and down the street, half block there, came and got him. Gave him a big signing bonus and said, come bring my house, pull out that one right now. And here's what you get. And they did. And they left. So just, I mean, to me, we're going to see inflation on that side of things because the only way that he gets his house finished is he lures that crew back or he gets another crew with some sort of higher price. And so it has to drive that. But I don't know how to look at it more on that global big issue. And I would hope that at some point this levels off and it stables out and we don't have that really quick sporadic movement and it will be a little more stable.
So Jeremy, I'm going to turn back over to you. Explain to us how many employees you have and your labor challenges. What type of people do you employ? And then we'll take it from there.
Okay, we employ about 4,500 people across all of our companies. And the labor shortage predates the pandemic. And so, you know, everybody thinks, well, the pandemic has created labor shortage. It really hasn't for us in the construction industry. We've been feeling this for years. I think it's going to be a bigger macro issue of immigration reform, training, getting more people into our industry. And that's a very long-term ordeal. So as far as that goes, it's been around. Did the pandemic increase that? Yes, it did. You know, it made it even perpetuated it further. But we've got to figure out how to solve the labor shortage in construction. And it's a big issue and a big deal, and nothing that will be solved overnight.
So you're having, are you working with different training programs? What are some of the solutions you were doing pre-pandemic, and then what are some of the things that can be done now?
Yeah, so you know, the way we attract workers, the best way we attract workers is actually by referral. So we've looked at that statistically inside of our company, and we get the best, I guess, funnel of employees through existing worker referrals, which is good. But you know, I'm on the board of MTech, and getting good technical training going. The Pathways program in the state of Utah has been helpful. So there's multiple ways there. I think the thing that's really tough is a lot of Americans that are living here don't want to get into those trades. And I think we've got to seriously tackle immigration reform and allow workers who are willing to work, can contribute to our society, that can really bring good skills to our economy and be good contributors to the economy, allow them to come and work. I think that's going to help.
Michael, talk about Ivory Homes. How many employees are at Ivory Homes? What type of employees are there? And talk about how, and this might be a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but tell us, you know, what's being done there to recruit employees.
Sure. So we have about 250 employees, but we have a trade base of about 3,000. So we look at them as part of the Ivory team. That's an important thing for us. We're often trying to solve their workforce challenges because they don't have the staff capacity in-house to think through how do I work with a technical college or anything else. I would say when the economy is this hot, it's hard to get people to go into any form of education versus taking the premium to walk next door to frame that other house. And to Jeremy's point, a lot of the pain points is low to medium skill positions where time on site and rapid training from our institutions, which is a little bit of a friction point. They want them in the associate's degree for 2 years, and the framer guys really just want them in there for 8 weeks. And there's a little bit of a philosophical collision there are good things happening, but we haven't solved to that yet, which is we just need a lot of low to medium skill workers. Part of that is the number of them, but also it's getting our institutions of higher education and technical colleges to adapt their training programs to be much more rapid and cost effective.
And to that point, and I think Jeremy touched on this, there's a construction pathway program that was created out of the governor's office of economic opportunity. And it's been going for a few years now, at least 4 that I know of. And the concept is to get students young in high school and rapidly skill them so they can get right back into the workforce. But again, there's competing efforts.
Well, and just a comment on that, they're doing an excellent job of getting them into UVU's construction management program, but there's only so many people to go start a home building company that need that education. They're getting a lot of folks into an excavator role, and those guys are making $100,000 or more to drive a tracker. If you want to make $100,000, go learn how to drive a tracker right now. Absolutely. But if that level of training is happening, so a lot of the horizontal construction, highway guys, the vertical guys, they're getting a lot of capacity from those programs, but the low and medium skill positions continue to be underserved.
And there's competition with the service industries and other industries for the labor pool as well. So it exacerbates the issue. So Interstate Brick, how many employees are there and what are your challenges related to that? Because the underlying theme here has been costs, growth, and labor.
We have a little over 150 just in our plant here in West Jordan. And like Jeremy said, the referrals is been our most successful area of getting employees. And we are offering our employees a $500 bonus to refer somebody. And that's been working. But also, like Jeremy said, it predates the pandemic. But we were having that problem before. Getting the people that want to work manufacturers not easy. It's not highly skilled, so it's difficult to get a lot of those people. All we have engineers and electricians and that kind of stuff, but most of our stuff is robots or labor.
Ross, I know you represent a lot of the home builders. How many employees do you feel that your association represents, and talk to us a little bit about your perspective on the labor issue?
Yeah, if I throw out a really big number we represent, and you have to ask for a raise. No, so member wise, we have about 2,500, but they represent, it will be a single member, for example, Ivory. I believe they have 2 or 3 memberships across the state for the different areas, but obviously represent things like right. He doesn't need 100 memberships, he only needs 1. So it represents a much bigger number than what we do. But we are involved in that a lot. We're involved with the pathways. We see huge value in that. But I think Michael did a great job explaining that there does become a collision with what we as the industry need and what higher ed needs, and how do we bridge that gap, and we're trying to work through that. So one of the things we've been looking at is even set up some small training programs, and we'll run them across the state, and we will do them hand in hand with the technical colleges. But it will be just what Jeremy said. It's a 6-week. It's a really short. We need to teach a guy to read a tape and not be dangerous. How do you shoot a nail gun? How do you be safe? How do we get you out on the job? And we can get you into making really good money real quick. And the magic thing about pathways, at least for me, is then we can take guys and we can put them in that. And if they say, I really like this, but I don't want to do this forever, I want to go into management, that's where they jump into that pathways. And there's multiple on-ramps and off-ramps that they can go all the way up and get a master's degree if they want in construction management. Or they can jump off and say, I like being a foreman, that's what I want to do, and it pays really well. So it's a big problem, and I think there's a lot of people really working hard to solve it, and we do our best.
So what I'm hearing is that the labor shortage is a link on the supply chain, really, and it's critical to get that addressed. This is a nationwide issue as well as a statewide issue. So let's talk about policy a little bit. I mean, that's what we're here to talk about for the most part. Michael, can you just talk a little bit about some of the policy initiatives that you know of, things that you're aware of? Obviously, we're talking labor and some of the initiatives that are happening statewide with education. But top of mind, do you have any initiatives that you know that are coming up that we should all keep our eyes on, that you think we should be getting behind?
How do you want me to frame it in terms of
You
supply
can do it,
chain?
supply
or-
chain and or anything that related to the housing. I know you're really involved in this space. We just love to keep that open as a discussion.
Well, one point I think is really relevant in all of this conversation is Jeremy's point about like the labor issue predated the pandemic. The Utah economy and national economy going into the pandemic was red hot. Frankly, red hot. Utah economy especially. Utah was one of only 2 states in the nation that added jobs during that. So we took a red hot economy, overlay a pandemic, we still grew. And then you take all this federal stimulus and other level of effort in the economy, there's a lot of energy and money flowing around already on a hot economy. I've been using the example of we put a rocket ship on the Honda Civic when it comes to the supply chain and transportation network. Like it was already stretched. Then they made business decisions for the pandemic, and then it got exacerbated in a big degree. Public policy solutions around those things all take time. Like we're not going to get the Trucker Employment Act of 2021. I just don't think that's something the state necessarily should do or could do. That's a market dynamic that will have to get solved. In terms of the broader dynamics on housing and legislation, I think the fact that we're pricing out more Utahns than we were before, it should be a clarion call to us that that's a big deal. It should be less about we have a shortage of units, that's real, right? But we're actually at this pricing territory now where it's less about a shortage of units, but it's a shortage of units affordable to the people that can't afford them. And so the teacher, the firefighter, the cop, just the single mom, I have a sister in Lehigh I've tried to get her to move 3 times and she's just knows her economics on the house she has today work, and she's not willing to move away from them. So that's got to be the clarion call around public policy. And so I think this next session, you'll see a lot of energy around housing. I think we're getting to realize there's no amount of public money that can buy us out of this problem. And we need to start looking at more systemic solutions around these issues of labor, particularly around land use. The 900-pound elephant in the room always is local land use. All these inputs, we're businesses, we're really good at managing our business. I can work with Jeremy and say, hey, you're killing me on the supply chain issue. We have a business relationship that conducively means we're going to solve the problem or try to. In a dynamic with a city, there isn't that necessarily. And so there are great cities that love to partner and are thinking of solving this, but oftentimes this is a regional or state issue at this point. We need regional or state solutions around land use.
Well, that'll continue to be the issue, knowing that someone runs for city council, they run on an anti-growth platform. That creates some challenges when you're talking about land use and growth, and a state that's growing, like you said, and that's pre-pandemic, and we continue to escalate for sure,
So can I talk a little bit on the policy?
Jump in.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because this is kind of something that really fascinates me or draws me into it. That a lot of times we start talking about the affordability of housing, and we all are drawn to these really big global issues. They're fun to talk about. They're easy to see. There's a lot of conversation, so even a guy like me can sound smart when we do it. But we can't really influence them. It's not, again, I like to pick on Clyde companies, but Clyde companies are doing a really, really good job of a really hard situation. And they can't influence what's happening to them any more than I can influence what they end up doing to us. But what we do have influence over is policy. We have local policies that we do have the ability to affect, and they have a huge impact on housing. Right now, it's estimated that the cost of the policies, those regulatory issues on housing is just short of 24%. So based on those numbers that Michael just gave us, you guys do the math, but that's a big chunk of money, depending on the house where you are, just for regulations. Some of those regulations are super important, and we would never suggest they're taken. Some of them aren't. Some of them are just traditions that cities have done forever and say, well, we did this because, and they continue to do it. But we can have really real impact on that, and it can change the price of a home by tens of thousands of dollars. And we should be focusing on that. We can make those changes.
So it sounds like we may have a question, so I'll turn it over to questions as we're getting ready to wrap up.
Perfect. So our first question is, how has the price increase in new building housing affected the price of existing houses on the market?
So I would say first and foremost, there was a huge dearth of inventory on existing homes. So new construction has been pretty much the only game in town for 9 months. And that's not to say there weren't existing homes. It's just they've been flying off the shelves. So it's not that there was a complete no inventory of existing homes. It's just it went and people stopped posting to the MLS and just posting to Facebook. That's a really critical thing to notice, that the market was moving so quickly that you could sell a home on Facebook in a half an hour. Like, that's crazy. In terms of the cost inputs, I mean, relatively speaking, there's 60,000 transactions in our state predominantly. New construction is probably 15% of that in a normal market. And so, yes, those cost increases do parlay, but there's always been a premium on new construction versus existing, depending on location.
Just a quick comment on that. Historically, there's been a larger gap between, especially in the last decade, between new construction and existing homes. And we've seen that tighten a little bit. I still think new construction is more expensive, but that has tightened up. Interesting.
Yes.
And we're to a point where just simple supply and demand. As you go back a couple of years ago, and we would have inventory of housing that was months deep. Now we have it, sometimes it's hours deep. I sat in a meeting last week, and I'm careful not to quote any stats because they change. But they, in the meeting last week, we were quoted that there were 3,300 homes for sale in the entire state of Utah. Normally, we will have over 30,000. So obviously that supply and demand is going to, if I have the luxury of being the only baker in town with bread, my bread's probably going to be fairly expensive.
All right, this next question, I think dovetails off that nicely. When/if there is a reset to inflation and prices, do you foresee house prices going back to where they were before, or are these high prices the new normal?
I think it's hard to predict, but we've seen it before. So if history predicts the future. We've seen the run-ups and we've seen the declines in housing. So it wouldn't surprise me if that happened.
No, but everybody remember, if it doesn't go down, we'll blame Jared.
I think it's really important to understand the fundamentals that are different from the last recession. So the last recession, we had supply in front of demand. So we had too many homes for people, which led to the foreclosure crisis. We have a flip of that. Now, there's a lot of questions about how big is the shortage and how has household formations and everything changed. I think over the next 2 years, we're going to find out how big the shortage is and how much it's meaningful. But I would say prices are going to moderate at best, and that's the appreciation cycle. So we're just going to, instead of seeing 23% 1 year, we're going to try and get back to 10 or 5. But I don't think you can really anticipate. Again, the crystal ball's always foggy, but I would say the reality is our housing prices caught up to the economic prosperity we've had. And so we're going to be living with housing prices at this level for the future.
Excellent. I'm going to combine two questions here. So what can or should be done to safeguard some of these supply chains from this climate volatility? I mentioned the winter storm in Texas and Hurricane Ida. And then off of that, are there any new renewable materials or creative solutions to traditional materials that you're excited about?
Well, I can jump on some of it. I don't know that there's a really good solution for like the storm in Texas. I mean, we just didn't know. People get smarter. We know we will protect those plants better in the future. As far as new products, I don't know that I have specifics, but I have been fascinated to watch, especially over the last year, that there are all kinds of new things coming out, especially in the construction industry. It's a very creative, driven group of people, and they're problem solvers. That's what they do. They get up every day and they go to work. They determine the problem for today and they solve it. Because whatever you're building, that's what it is a series of problems. And so this became a problem, and there's all kinds of new solutions happening. I see SunPro down off the freeway that they're starting to build a lot more panelized stuff. And I don't want to steal your thunder, but we're finding ways to build faster and more efficiently with fewer people. Along with, we're finding new materials and how to apply it. Now our biggest problem is back to the regulatory thing I talked about. We get a new product and we say, wow, this is a really neat thing. We have a product that's fiberglass rebar. We have a really hard time getting that fiberglass rebar through the code adoption process. So we can't use it, even though we have engineers that say it's lighter and it's a lot stronger than our current process. So things are happening, and like I said, I don't want to steal your thunder, but you should talk about what you do with the panels, because that's really cool.
Yeah, I think the longer this goes, the more likely substitutes will come into the marketplace. If it's transitory, it'll be less likely. The longer it goes, it will be. And we over the past 2 or 3 decades, we've been hearing about just-in-time inventory. That's the way you go. That's the way it happens. I think people are now realizing there's got to be a balance, and you don't want to hold too much inventory because prices are volatile up and down. But just-in-time inventory may not be the sole solution either, as we've seen in the pandemic.
All right. With a volatile supply chain and rapidly growing populations, do you expect to see a shift away from single-family homes into more multifamily and high-density structures?
I think pricing is going to dictate that more than anything. There's just density does drive value, and that's just a reality. When you put more units on a smaller piece of land, it lands up to 1/3 of the total cost. If you can get more efficient with that, then you're certainly going to have that play out in the product type and everything else. The supply chain challenges we have in our apartment business are just as meaningful as our homes business. they're just less micro. So instead of solving for a standing tub for one home, they're solving to 600 tubs for the apartment building. So it's just scale in terms of those impacts. But again, we're going to go through an urbanization in the next 10 years in our market. We already had apartments out leading single family permits over the last 10 years. I think that continues, but it's more a factor of affordability than it is anything with supply chain.
Do that, it makes the affordability issue a little better when we have more units per acre, if you will. And availability of land in Salt Lake County is diminishing greatly. And so you have to find, when you find ground, you have to build more units on that. And so really, they typically, I was going to say, they go vertical rather than horizontal with the units. But it does create, it creates some construction issues with that. Some products aren't capable of going very high. And so that creates some of the issues for them. But land availability, and as Ross was alluding to, fees that are coming from municipalities are creating enough of the issue as well.
There's two more. How do states like Texas, where housing is more affordable, differ from Utah? Are there any models or practices that we can adopt from other states to help make housing more affordable here?
I'll jump in really fast and just say we have mountains and lakes. The number one difference between Utah and other places, not a lot of people know, we're the 7th most urban state in the country. We're confined by our geography. We can't do the Texas model of just rings of growth from the urban core forever, and not to mention the transportation air quality issues of growing that way. It's just inefficient for that reason. So that's why we can't be Texas. The flip side of that on looking for ideas is we actually sponsor a group up here at the University of Utah called Ivory Innovations. And we are in our 4th year of searching for the best ideas from entrepreneurs predominantly, solving to different areas of finance, construction, design, and policy. And so I would say the good thing of a crisis is people innovate, and we're seeing more and more of that innovation come through. And I'm hopeful that those lead to really systemic solutions.
Perfect. I think we have a question in the room. Okay, we'll ask this one and this one's back. We'll hit it. What advice do you have for upcoming first-time home buyers or the average homeowner seeking to renovate in the next couple of years?
Ross.
I thought you were going to just jump in and say, go with Ivory.
You're supposed to say that.
Well, no,
I need to third party validation.
I was will since you did this. Yeah, consider Ivory. No, I think be very, very thoughtful about the process is all I can say. It is a difficult process, especially right now when we're looking at it. Ask the questions of what is the volatility. Know that if you enter into a project right now, what can we expect? What will the increases or could the increases be? Are there options if I pre-buy lumber real quick? And so be thoughtful and deliberate about the process. And I say go with Ivory, but in all seriousness, be really, really careful about who you choose as your builder. Make sure it's somebody you trust and somebody you can work with, because this is a very meaningful partnership that will affect your life. Make sure you joined up with the right partner. It is really important.
Don't sit it out, which is number one. It's not as crazy. Most people have an idea that you have to have a 20% down payment. And so they just line themselves out in the market like that. There are a lot of financial options for you to be able to get in a house for a much more affordable down payment. Rates are at an all-time low. Like, it's a good time to buy if you can find a house, number one. Number two, don't sit out of the debate. So the first-time home buyer is the constituency a lot of people up here are working for to say, we got to keep Utah affordable. You should be showing up to a planning commission meeting saying, I want to approve that townhome project. I don't live here, but I would like to, and I would like to be able to afford here. That's something that really needs to change, is that we need the buyers of the future to get engaged in the policy process and not just have the establishment of current stakeholders be the ones messaging it.
That's an excellent position. And there's another side to that, and that is the starter home and the luxury home and the home that's in between. And we had this issue probably back in 2007 when we had, prior to I don't want to call it a crash, but a downturn, how about that? We had a lot of middle-level homes and not enough starter homes being built. So a lot of people flipped and started doing starter homes, but we lost that gap home in the middle and that move-up home. And that needs to be there, but again, it's the ground, and so you got to find a way to get around that. Sometimes it's taking down old houses.
One more quick comment. I think interest rates help drive demand of housing. And so pay attention to interest rates. They are at historical lows. So if you can afford it, it's a good time to get in and lock it in. But if interest rates, the pressure's there. If they start to rise, it's going to impact housing prices. It will impact the market. So interest rates is a huge input.
All right, those are our online questions. Are there any questions from the folks in the room? I'll pass that to you.
I just want to thank you guys for being here today. I think this was a great discussion and I hope everybody enjoyed it. I know I learned quite a bit. And I'd like to thank you all for being here and the Hinckley Institute for having us and hosting this forum. I think when we're talking about it and being solution driven, we're going to come up with some ideas to make some differences. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was never